More than 30,000 people in the UK were infected with HIV and hepatitis C after being given contaminated blood products by the National Health Service in the 1970s and 80s. Many have since died, others unknowingly passed infections on to partners who then died. Victims and their families have spent decades fighting for compensation. Chloe Hayward explains.
It's known as the biggest treatment disaster in NHS history, and so far we know that 3,000 people have died in the UK from infected blood and infected blood products they were given by the NHS. Overall, 30,000 victims have been identified, and these fall into two main categories. There's the people with rare genetic blood clotting disorders, such as the haemophiliacs, and there's people who needed blood transfusions after surgery, for example. So let's start with this first group, the haemophiliacs. So people with blood clotting disorders, they need a special protein called factor VIII or factor IX injected, which helps their blood clot. But by the 1970s, the UK was really struggling to meet demand for these blood products, and so they started to import from America. But because America pays for blood plasma rather than it being donated for free, it came from a lot of high-risk individuals, including prisoners, drug addicts, and those most in need for money. And so with these donations came some deadly viral infections, such as hepatitis C and HIV. In the late 70s, US drug companies were aware that their product was infected with viruses, including hepatitis, but they didn't take steps to stop that transmission. Instead, what they did is they mixed together ever larger batch numbers of donations. Sometimes up to 50,000 plasma donations would be mixed together in one batch. And it took just one infected donor to infect the entire batch. By 1983, the pharmaceutical companies, they were aware there was a link between haemophiliacs and HIV, but instead of raising the alarm, they kept it quiet. Some medics and whistleblowers did try to raise the alarm around the world, but health officials did not listen. We now know that 1,250 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C who had blood clotting disorders in this country. 320 of them were children, and almost all have now died. Now let's look at this second group of people, those with blood transfusions. They were given blood transfusions during surgery or after childbirth or an accident, and they were given it was infected with hepatitis C. It was known that blood transfusions could infect people with hepatitis as early as the 1970s, but those that are exposed, they weren't tested, even when a test became available, and minimal effort was made to identify those infected. Even now, we still have people coming forward in this country who have just been diagnosed decades after their infection, but often it's too late. You see, hepatitis attacks the liver, leading to cirrhosis and eventually cancer, so a late diagnosis often comes with a dire prognosis. The inquiry said that through blood transfusion treatment, up to 27,000 people were infected with hepatitis C, and between 80 and 100 got HIV. During the inquiry, we heard from children that grew up as orphans, mothers who buried their children, and husbands who unknowingly passed infections onto their wives. Victims said they were ignored by doctors, and they said they were treated as dirty or second-class citizens by the NHS. Victims and their families have waited 40 years for justice. The focus now is on compensation.